impart for us all the good health effects that they provide. So I thought I would put in what looks like a reasonably boring paragraph, but I think it's very significant. The microbiome science is maturing through a phase. And you can read most of this with me. Um, it's basically saying that there's so much to be learned that it mostly is telling us how much more we need to learn. So much has already been established through both animal models and human models for different stages of the lifespan, but all it says is, but what about, and can we nail it down any better? So what's called that tenuous homeostasis between the limited physiological effects of some older people, because I'm really referring, making this talk for us. Anyway, all of these may have a profound impact. And this is from the magazine Nature. Okay. Um, the unique gut microbiome patterns that are linked to healthy aging and increased longevity have also been recently published. And there's, again, a flood of new information found that the gut microbiome pattern differences between older adults who are lean and physically active compared to less fit and less healthy contemporaries, as well as healthy contemporaries. So, what that means is the research is trying to say, yes, there's a microbiome difference as we mature, and yet there's still a big difference between those of us who have matured and are reasonably healthy and active and lean versus those of us who have perhaps any kind of chronic disease and perhaps we're not lean and we would like to be healthier. So some of the recommendations may have a greater impact on some more than others. And early development of frailty is less about the gut microbiome. So, next slide. By the way, we're talking about, I have to change, there we go. I had images showing on my screen that were blocking my ability to see all the text. We're talking about the gut, meaning the gastrointestinal system, from the mouth to the anus, mostly the large intestine. But if we talked about the entire human body, we know that of all the cells, counting every cell that makes up a liver, your lung, your stomach, your brain, all those cells together, we are outnumbered tenfold by the number of cells that are microorganisms. Awfully flattering, but we're really just a big old sponge of bugs. Thank goodness for those bugs, however. Okay, now, how the gut microbiome supports health. We know that they're important. I think when I was a kid, we never talked about bacteria in our intestines. In fact, we only thought of them as potentially harmful. But first of all, they make vitamin K, certain varieties of bacteria. They also improve absorption of water. And absorption of water from the large intestines has to do with regularity. If you absorb water too quickly, you can be constipated. If you don't absorb enough water, you may have constantly loose stools. So there's very important role of the gut microbiome for that. Preventing colon cancer, volumes of information on that, and helps with mineral absorption. So absorbing calcium, for example, will give us strong bones. It also supports our immune system, so it helps to repair damage to the lining of the intestines. Now, let's say the lining of the intestines is made up of cells, and the cells are very tightly joined. And like if you think of a chain link fence, the little links between each of the bigger links are made up of things that are produced by the bacteria. Also helps the immune system because there are actually bugs in our digestive system that recognize dangerous bacteria and sort of launch an attack. It's fascinating and wonderful. And so there's a little image to the right if you want to read the small print there, distinguishing between good and bad bacteria. And it therefore protects against bad bacteria like salmonella. That's the smallest circle on the far right. Um, I'm going to come back to that because what this overview is telling us is what we know about the gut microbiome in general, but we also know that as we mature, for reasons that may have to do with our diet and our activity level and our health condition, but also just general, that we have fewer of those bacteria that can protect us against salmonella. Okay. Um, it's also, I like to call it, I think I got this idea from another person who studies the gut microbiome, a good microbiologist. It's a bouncer. So you can't get, some populations of bacteria have a hard time getting established, and that's partly because of the other bacteria. So when new bacteria are introduced, even through probiotics that we could take or through an accidental introduction of new bacteria, they may try to grow, but a gastroenterologist told me it's kind of like trying to find a parking space outside of Lincoln Center on a night that the New York Philharmonic is performing. Nearly impossible. You might get one spot, but you're not going to keep it. So we do want to keep our gut bacteria happy. Okay, here's the point. There will be no test. Actually, we might have had a test with some prizes, but here goes. These are called bacterial phyla, which we can call families. And the families have uncles and aunts and cousins and lots of subgroups. You see their Firmicutes, Bacteroidetes, keep going, Proteobacteria, and so on. These have been in our bodies ever since we were evolving. So they're longer on the earth than us. And as I have here, some of them you'd like to invite over for dinner, but some of them no. Okay. And when we talk about the healthy ones and the ones we want to support with good dietary choices, a lot of them will be in the Firmicutes family. Okay, so for example, don't worry about reading or remembering any of these. Remember, there won't be a test. But here are some of the ones in that family that we want. Lactobacillus for sure, especially these are some of the ones that are in probiotic products that we can buy. And then there's the Theocalibacterium that produce this butyrate. Now I'm going to throw this butyrate word around a few more times, but there are the Eubacterium produce butyrate and the Rosae bruria produce butyrate. Why is butyrate such a big deal? Well, butyrate is kind of a substance that acts as a glue to hold those cells in the large intestines together, to keep them joined, to sort of seal off their tight junction. And when the butyrate is in short supply, then the cells can come apart, allowing things to be absorbed into the circulation that shouldn't be there. So the tight junctions are really important, and butyrate is the glue. It's the goo that the human body uses to hold those cells together, and it's made by bacteria. Okay, so I have one of the notes down here is that without butyrate, colon cells undergo something called self-digestion. Doesn't sound friendly, doesn't sound tasty. But it's a particular bacteria product that is only produced in the absence of oxygen, so that means it's in the large intestine. And curiously, butyrate doesn't only exist in our intestines as this product, but it's also in the oil of hogweed. It's also in parsnips. I'm going to show you a picture in a moment. Occasionally you get references to butyric acid, which is not different terribly from butyrate, but it is a completely different product. It's what we call a short-chain fatty acid. It's a saturated fat, and it comes from the Greek word for butter. It's in the biochemistry world that these Greek words are applied to food and animal life. It's the smell of butter that's gone bad also, rancidity, and it's also the kind of a smell that you get when you have vomit. But it's also in kombucha tea, which people love to eat. Okay, so here's that piece about hogweed. As I mentioned, um, hogweed has butyrate, but please do not go out into the meadow and look for hogweed to add to the butyrate. Just let's eat good food so that we make our bacteria happy. By the way, this hogweed is not a distant, but terribly distant rather, cousin to carrots and parsley and celery and parsnips. And you might recognize that flower cluster because it kind of looks like that weed that we call Queen Anne's lace because they're all botanically related. But look how big they are. And if you get the the sap of the giant hogweed on your skin and you're exposed to sunlight, you will get burned. And that's why this guy is all dressed up. Okay, a little uh dietitian trivia. Okay, so now the patterns of the gut microbes, because we want to be able to support our microbes with good dietary choices throughout our life cycle. And they do change. I'm going to show you a way of imaging how the changes occur. But I have to say, when I saw this picture and I decided to borrow it and stick it in my PowerPoint, I noticed the guy with the beard. It reminded me of something I saw on Facebook, so I thought I would share it with you. No hipsters. Don't be coming in here with your hairy faces and your vegan diets and your tiny feet and sand all over your body. No, 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 wait. Hamsters. No hamsters. I just thought the bearded man reminded me of that. Okay. Now, how do our gut bugs get started? Well, babies are born with what we would call a sterile gut. But by age, the roughly third day of life, the composition of the microbiota starts with what the baby is being fed. So breastfeeding has many attributes that cannot be compared to bottle feeding. One of them is delivering microorganisms to the baby's gut. And some studies have shown when a baby is born by C-section, the bacteria in the baby's gut, not necessarily harmfully so, but they actually reflect the bacteria in the delivery room. That's how intimately they can be acquired. Okay, so the actinobacteria dominates when the baby's breastfed, and you can see that. This will be one of those ones I said there will be no test. Okay, and then the gut bacteria changed depending on where you live as we age, depending on our diet and our health condition. So here is a way of looking at it. We're going to get to food. Newborn. Now, if I said who are the good guys, we could say the proteobacteria are not the good guys. We can say the firmicutes are. But it's not just the presence of the firmicutes, but also the relative amounts of all the others. So you can see one of the things, let me go backwards. When we talk about the risk of, let's say, a foodborne illness is much more likely in the young, the very young, and the mature, because we may not have those bacteria that know how to recognize bad bacteria and block them. So food outbreaks are often, the caution is there. And so now you can just see why there's research to consider dietary choices for probiotics or for dietary choices and or probiotics in older. We still have a significant amount of firmicutes, although they decline as you mature, but we haven't got quite as many of the bacteroidetes, which the healthy younger adult has. It's slightly lower, and we have slightly more of the proteobacteria, and those are not friendly. Okay, what we know is that diet will affect them. Okay, so who's the boss of who? Once again, may I offer you a straightforward paragraph. Modern diets that are rich in salty, sugary, or fatty processed foods may damage the aging gut. I have one of those guts they're talking about. So higher fiber, nutritious foods like fruits and vegetables and seeds and beans and nuts could be combined with exercise to help protect. That's a big point. I have a reference toward the end of my PowerPoint to talk. This is proven. So that's where we want to go. How can we incorporate those foods and enjoy them and get them cheaply and enjoy the taste? So what about that highly salty foods? And in truth, while I think most of us who are actively participating in programs at RSS are really not shoving this food in our faces, we see that it's still very prevalent. And I don't mind saying every now and then it's fun to have some of that. But the high protein foods, the high amounts of saturated fats, the high amounts of sweets, and what we call ultra processed can influence those bugs that make that butyrate. And that butyrate is the goo that helps to hold the intestinal cells together. I don't want you to feel guilty every time you have a hamburger, but feel a little guilty. Okay. Here's an interesting picture. I thought it was worth trying. I can say that, however, there is no association between tall buildings and inflamed body. It's an association of the fact that in our urban setting, we're much more likely to get fast foods and convenience foods. Okay. So the more the ultra processed foods, especially, we all come from a history where we ate um, bologna, we ate salami, we still eat hot dogs. It doesn't mean that these foods are deathly with every bite. It's the predominance of them in our overall dietary choices that makes them unfavorable. And many studies know way beyond just simple health, but depression, inflammatory diseases of the intestinal linings, cancer, especially colon cancer, even Alzheimer's, is associated with highly processed foods and the absence of the others. And that is because, once again, bacteria produce many different substances that can affect something called the gut brain axis, that can affect many different other conditions. So let's talk about this definition of ultra processed or unprocessed. So I think it gets tossed around, and I'm going to show you the definition which is in place, and it's called the NOVA classification. And by the way, NOVA doesn't mean anything, it just means new. And I think the long history of it is probably about 20 years ago when the definitions get sort of revised from a professor in Brazil, in Sao Paulo. So I also make a giggle and say, it's kind of like porn. You know, ultra processed when you see it. Okay. So there's four categories: minimally processed or not processed at all. Then they're called processed culinary ingredients, then processed foods, then ultra processed foods. So here's the flow. We all know an unprocessed food when we see it. I like to say, pretend you're imagining the apple on the tree. Does it look the same, or has it been cut up and put into a crust? If you see, let's say, a chicken thigh as is, you know it used to be a chicken, but if it's already in little bits, coated in flour, deep fat fried, you know it's more processed. Okay. But frankly, some foods like mustard would be an unprocessed food, mustard seed. But by the time you have mustard in a jar, it's considered a processed food. So in one way, I want to make sure that the concept of processed does not automatically um, declare that a food is not fit for consumption, because some processing is necessary. Some processing preserves food, makes it more edible, keeps it on the shelf long enough to enjoy it for many more occasions. But at the risk of boring you, here are those categories of unprocessed. So it's any edible part of a plant or an animal, which we said, if it's an apple or it's a chicken leg, including algae and fungi. Ugh, or fungi. Okay. It also can include minimally processed food. So if you take milk, which is considered an unprocessed food, it by law, most milk is pasteurized, meaning that it's heated to a certain temperature to get rid of certain potentially dangerous microbes. Something that is fermented is considered unprocessed. Okay, now the next category is called processed culinary ingredients. And this is where the things that we use to mostly prepare our food, like oils, like peanut butter. Oh, okay, that's not something you prepare your food with, or that you can add it to ramen noodles and it makes them way tastier. Um, but some of those ingredients, salt, oil, are part of the processed culinary ingredient group. So group three are now processed foods. And this is where you have included a stage of preparation, such as baking or boiling or canning or dehydrating. And so when you buy things in the store like tuna fish or even a loaf of bread, that's a processed food because it is not wheat directly from the field, and it has been crushed and combined with other ingredients and baked. So it might be unfair that a pastry and a bread are in the same group as a processed food, but this is where we use our we distinguish them for our health reasons. Okay. And the fourth, the ultra processed. This is where you know it when you see it. This is lots of salt added, especially if a food has been engineered, it's completely taken apart and then reformed. This would be to me a Pringles. And although I know they're popular, give me a real potato chip. When you bite down on it, you have something in your mouth. The Pringle just seems to go off into the sunset. How do I know? Because I ate some yesterday. Okay. Okay. Breakfast cereals. If I were going to comment on, let's say, Cheerios versus uh, some kind of a chocolate coated thing, I would say the minimum amount of added ingredients, the better. Then you can also bump up your cereal by adding some dried fruit to it, adding some nuts, and so on. Okay, so that's the fast and furious definition of what is meant by processed and unprocessed, minimally processed, ultra processed, processed and ultra. And we have lots of evidence that says the parts of the world where people eat ultra processed foods, they have more disease, shorter lifespan, and not a very happy gut. Okay. What else is in our food supply, which is part of that processed and ultra processed extension, are things like emulsifiers. So, emulsifiers have been around for a while. They're actually a brilliant invention of the food industry. They keep things from crystallizing when they should stay smooth. They help to keep oils and water from separating. So, in like a salad dressing, they may help with the creaminess of instant chocolate milk or uh, not full fat ice creams, but sort of what they would call frozen dessert by definition, icings and frostings. So if we were to turn the clock back 100 years, precious few of these things existed. So when we have that thought about, well, my grandparents ate, cake and they had buttercream icing, or they had a lot of the kinds of foods that we eat today. Truly, the ingredients were quite different. And it turns out these emulsifiers, there's um, a very impressive set of research about how it can actually affect heart disease, mainly because the emulsifiers are not broken down in the stomach or the small intestines. So when they reach the large intestines, these emulsifiers are like bullies. They're trolls. They cannot be broken further, and they then can interfere with other microorganisms' growth and reproduction. So, does that mean we're never ever going to buy a hot cocoa mix or never ever going to buy ice cream? No, but just tell yourself, if I can see the word emulsifier on an ingredient list, can I think of an alternative product where you don't have emulsifiers? Okay, we're still talking about foods that will help keep our gut happy, that will therefore help enhance us and keep us having hopefully continued good health. All right. So it's already been hinted at, and I'll hint at it a little more as we go. But a diet rich in proteins and fats, notably saturated fats, but not necessarily only saturated fats, is associated with some of the proteobacteria. Remember, that was the red one that are not so body friendly, whereas a diet rich in plant based foods is associated with the firmicutes that make the butyrate. And curiously, you can even see a change in gut microorganism colonies. It's a small change, but it's a measurable change within 1 to 2 days of switching from a high fat, high meat diet to a plant diet. I don't have an interpretation of that. It doesn't mean, sure, every Saturday you can pig out, yeah, why not, on that big steak and that omelet with extra cheese. But truly, most of your diet should ideally be something that is plant based or mostly plant based. Okay, so here comes that Mediterranean diet again. They're always bragging, those Mediterraneans, about how good their diets are. So it has been compared, the composition of the Mediterranean diet, which I don't have a picture. I think I took it out because I was worried about space. Um, it's your piece of salmon with your side salad and a nice cautious amount of pasta or bread or couscous. Um, it has been shown to help the establishment of the kind of bacteria that are associated with improved blood sugars and reduced prevalence or new cases, prevalence being existing cases or new cases of diabetes. Not too shabby Mediterranean diet. That's pretty good. And what are the suggestion that the kinds of colonies that are growing in good numbers on a Mediterranean style diet? It's the Paraprovitella and the Bacteroidetes. Okay. This is a quote from a research study. A correlation between certain health promoting foods. This is the bragging Mediterranean guys again, such as olive oil and fiber consumption on the certain bacterial genera. So if we take anything from now, it's fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, olive oil. I suspect canola oil could put a toe in the door because the composition of the fat is similar, but olive oil also has these things called polyphenols. Okay. Also, with the Mediterranean diet, they observe certain foods, such as red meat, are associated with microorganisms that are less beneficial. I think you got the point. I think you're convinced. Let's move on. Okay, well, there's also some recent things about whether or not sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, or what the artificial sweetener industry wants you to call sugar substitutes, it's far more friendly phrase, do they adversely affect the colonies in your intestines? So this new have reports have been out saying that they may be detrimental, but something that just came out February the 6th of 2024, that LNCS, which means low or no calorie sweeteners, L for low, N for no, C for calorie, S for sweeteners, including Splenda. I guess you can imagine that I pull this from an article that was published by someone representing Splenda, uh, found either no impact on the gut microbiome or a positive impact. So in the second bullet point, it notes that stevia had a beneficial impact on the gut microbiota, increasing the density of the certain health promoting. So the certain health promoting are listed, but pretty much it's still the Bacteroidetes and those Firmicutes, all those good guys. All right. So if you picture yourself in your kitchen or at your dining table, and if you're using a sugar substitute for reasons of either calories or blood sugar, don't worry that those are somehow having a negative impact on your gut. Okay. So other examples of food that help the gut, the microorganism colonies to grow include, as these are the ones that I've listed, foods that are high in something called inulin. But I want to caution, there are a lot of people who have a condition called irritable bowel syndrome. And with irritable bowel syndrome, many people are very, very sensitive to inulin. If you know anyone who eats garlic, which is also a high inulin food, I don't think I've had more than one Jerusalem artichoke in my life, so that won't be on my menu to worry about. But some people get a problem with shallots and red onions. It's a bloating and discomfort, not necessarily heartburn. That should be something different. But here again are examples of foods, and I'm pushing foods. I do not want you to look in the health food store or go to Trader Joe's or Whole Foods and look for this inulin powder. But foods are good ways to support your bugs. The bugs like that inulin. They seem to find it to be their version of dessert. Whoops. Okay. What else is a good way to make your gut bugs happy with the foods you like? So we all know that whenever you eat a carbohydrate, which could include the sugars that are in fruits, the starches that are in grains and potatoes, cereals, pasta, that these foods in about 5 minutes or maybe as long as 35 minutes will eventually leave your mouth, go into your digestive system, and then be broken down by enzymes into glucose. And the glucose is absorbed into your bloodstream as glucose. After that, your body has to produce insulin to help basically move the glucose out of the bloodstream and into your cells. Okay. So there's something about what's called resistant starch that says when that gets into your intestines, the enzymes that break it down into glucose have a harder time getting to it because once that cooked food cools off, because we think of eating hot spaghetti and hot potatoes and hot rice, but once that those foods have cooled off, there is a sort of a gelatinous environment around the starch molecules. They form a funny gel. And you can picture that if you were cooking, I'm so sorry, cutting a cooked potato. There's something sort of slippery about it. It turns out that does two things. First of all, it slows down how fast the carbohydrate in that potato will show up into your blood as glucose, which is a good thing. But it also turns out to be something that the gut microbiome loves. And so, to some extent, can you think about eating half of your meals with starchy pasta or rice or potato? Can you consider some amount of those foods to be eaten in a cold recipe versus a hot one? And might even make it easier on you as your personal chef. Um, these are things, if they're refrigerated after cooking, then don't reheat them. That's the deal. They don't have to be cold, they just have to have cooled off so that the starch molecules have kind of rearranged themselves into that gel. Um, as I say this, I think I'm getting a taste for some sushi later on, or sashimi. I don't, the one that has no raw meat. I like the California roll. Okay, next slide. What are some other examples of resistant starch? And these don't have to be, the message here is not cooked and then cooled, but simply even in their ordinary form. So green bananas, but who eats a green banana? I mean, you may grate it and use it to make a pastele, but it still is cooked at that point. Um, Raw banana, but slightly green. So if that's what you like, it's probably going to do a little more benefit for your gut microbiome than a raw banana that's very, very ripe and has fruit flies circling it and little dark spots. That's the one I like. Okay, as you can go down the list, green peas frozen, lentils, cold pasta here, cold potato, and oatmeal. So these are twofold beneficial. One, they nourish our gut microbes, and secondly, they slow down glucose released into the bloodstream, or what's called a glycemic effect. Next slide. Here we go. So, enjoying that resistant starch. How come? Because the microorganisms that eat resistant starch make butyrate. Butyrate is that stuff that helps the lining of the intestines to be more securely tight and prevent the intestinal wall from, let's say, leaking. All right. If you have had an occasion to be diagnosed with intestinal inflammation, I'm not saying resistant starch will help to cure you, but it certainly does, it's well established to help support the microorganisms that will help protect you. Okay, so this resistant starch may first of all sound like, I don't want to eat my food cold. So let's just see if that's a pattern across the globe. It turns out that Americans are eating very little resistant starch on an average day, 3 to 6 grams. That's not much at all. A slice of bread has 15 grams of carbohydrate. So if you, and I wouldn't, actually, I would not have used a slice of bread as an example of a resistant starch, but just as a reference point for how much carbohydrates in food. So if we're eating less resistant starch than what is in a slice of bread, we're eating very little. Okay, so Italy, someone has figured out by doing a dietary assessments, maybe 8.5 grams a day. India and China, up to 15. Does that mean they're eating more green bananas or eating more inulin or eating more cold food? I'm not sure, but as an estimate. And then I'm not sure what this, I can check the source. Rural South Africa, people have 38 grams of resistant starch a day. Remember, a slice of bread has the approximately 15. Um, a, a white potato, like what they call a russet potato, which is the size that you could probably enclose in your hand, in your fingers, in this much space. That might be about 10 grams of starch. 38 a day. So what it seems to be is a popular traditional food that includes beans and cooled corn. And I think that sounds great. So let's all of us consider maybe a beans and cooled corn dish once or twice a week. Okay. More examples of resistant starch. Well, I think I had a slide earlier that was a little more of a chart. So this gives us kind of a picture of things that are likely to be on our grocery store shelf. Okay. So if you don't mind a little bit of repetition, the whole idea of the Western diet was fed to humanized mice. Humanized mice means they basically um, took the microorganisms out of the mice's intestines and inoculated them with colonies similar to what we as humans would have. Can you imagine the microorganisms in the intestines of a mouse, a free living mouse, like the ones that run around? It's going to be very different from ours. But they found that when the mice were humanized, that they had increased body fat. Isn't that interesting? Because that seems to be that we can develop microorganisms that allow us to store fat more efficiently. That's kind of amazing. But anyway, a lower fat diet that's rich in plants compared to a high fat, high sugar diet is going to also keep us, hopefully, from developing that fat. That plate looks pretty good. Um, Personally, I like warm food, so I can see having put most of that in the microwave first. Okay, next slide is so a quick summary, and after that we're going to wrap it up. The variety in the colonies of bacteria influenced by our age, by our geographic location, our health status, and also the certainly early on the conditions of our birth and how much carbohydrate, meat, and additives we include. Remember that when it's disrupted, owing to changes in diet, perhaps having to have repeated regimens of antibiotics, or any other sort of insult to the gut, leads to any of those conditions that are on the left. And the best foods to support are bugs, lots of veggies, beans, fruits, nuts, seeds, unprocessed meats, and fish. And less processed meats, less convenience food, less boxed pastries. I like the fact that it says boxed pastries because that means if you bake your own. Hmm. Okay. And many different kinds of candies. So that translates into some still very appealing, very tempting plates. I have in my upper left what looks like sweet potato, maybe kale or collard greens with the yellow squash and fresh chicken. The square on the left, on the bottom, is images of almonds, cheese, celery, and fig bars, and those look like um, full fiber whole wheat fig bars. And then, of course, on the right, the large plate with the broccoli, the beets, the sweet potato, the carrots, and that probably is salmon. Good meals, reasonably affordable. Um, Certainly, if you don't have to, we're not saying eat salmon 7 days a week unless you have an uncle in the business, in which case you'll call me as soon as our presentation is over. Okay, here's some other foods, which are other meals that could easily support our microorganisms. So the rice could be cold as opposed to hot, because you might be thinking, but white rice, isn't that low in fiber? Yes, but if it's cold, it's high in resistant starch. Okay, and then the soups that have predominantly plant or vegetable and lentil or other meat, I'm so sorry, bean ingredients. You see the plate on the upper right, lots of fiber. And by the way, this is about gut microorganisms and the fibers and the resistant starch, but those foods also still have lots of folic acid and beta carotene and vitamin C. So they have many benefits for general health beyond just the gut. Okay, bottom and bottom left, bottom right, again, more interesting foods that are welcomed by our gut microbiome. And wow, first now I'm craving not just California rolls, but some tacos. Okay. And one final plate of foods that are going to be, these are minimally processed. If you remember the definition of processing, first is plain foods in their original form. The second stage of processing is where it's an ingredient, such as salt or oil or other forms of fat. And the third stage is where those ingredients have been incorporated into regular food. And the fourth stage is where the foods have been much more handled, dehydrated, um, reformulated, and so on. So this is almost exactly the stage one of that categorization of unprocessed. If you eat canned chickpeas or canned carrots, those are actually in the processed category, but that doesn't mean that all the processed foods are inherently problematic. The idea is if this is the plate in front of you, you're going to have a good forward look. Your life looking forward is going to be good. Um, I couldn't resist this one. Of course, if you don't like kale, that darling of green vegetables, you could stir coconut into it, and that makes it easier to scrape it into the trash. Moving on. Okay, so I thought I'd end with a couple of straightforward definitions. When we think of food that supports the microorganisms that live in our intestines, those are called prebiotic foods. If we eat a food that has active microorganisms in it, such as yogurt, that is a probiotic food. So once again, simple definition, a probiotic means that it has organisms that are living inside the food, and we eat the food. And yeah, the organisms can survive into our digestive tract. Okay. These are also examples of probiotic foods where you have yogurt, kefir, you have pickles, you have sauerkraut. And if anyone is interested in taking on pickling, it's not very hard at all. And what it is a way of allowing microorganisms to grow in the food, but not to the point of food spoilage. Let's see, here's some more probiotic, meaning that they contain live microorganisms. I tasted natto once. I don't think I'm going to be a natto fan. That's number 4. Kombucha, remember, has that butyric acid in it. So it's also like, I'm only drinking this because it's good for me. Okay. But yogurt, who doesn't love yogurt all the time? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the live cultures make it a probiotic food. A prebiotic food would say, I'm going to finish a prebiotic, would be the ones that your body will take in and allow the microorganisms to live on it, to ferment it. And that's therefore, it's helping the organisms that are already there. So studies do show that probiotics boost immunity. In effect, this is in part a combination of probiotic foods as well as some probiotic colonies that you can buy in a capsule. But I'm referring here to food. Um, increase the production of something called immunoglobulin A and decreases the production of allergy-specific IgE or immunoglobulin E. So that just means that your body is kind of calmed down. The immune system is ready to take on an alien attack without your body overreacting. That might be a simplified explanation, but it's from the heart. And reduce what is called antibiotic associated diarrhea. This is something that is more of a medical condition, but if anyone experiences it, then you need to know that it's possible that you could eat more probiotic foods, and it's possible that some probiotic products can help. Okay, there's not much showing helping with weight loss. Um, but if anything, this particular lactobacillus, so maybe if anybody wants to write their book on how yogurt will help with weight loss, good luck. Okay. Oral health. So there's commercial products, but the strains are to reduce periodontal disease, or in other words, inflammation around the gums, throat infections, bad breath. They may not have anything that's really as effective as we wish, but there is research on in that area. And then if you were buying a probiotic, because we're talking here really only about eating foods that have active microorganisms, you really, it's still kind of an unregulated anything goes industry. Probably the better brand names, and I don't own stock in any company, nor do I get an honorarium or a coupon. But sometimes the better known ones, if you can find out what strains are in them and know that there are some promising things with bifidobacterium and the lactobacillus, and perhaps some specific ones that are researched, but as my first slide said, the research is great. It just tells us how much more we need to know. Okay, I think this was my chat about what foods make up substances that the microorganisms like to eat. So these are the prebiotic, non-digestible components. And as I did mention, some people may have bloating or distress with some of these foods for that very reason. The microorganisms are saying, thank you for that delicious meal, and then they turn it into the 4th of July. Okay, practical considerations if you were buying a probiotic substance, but once again, I'm encouraging everybody to eat good foods that have the live microorganisms or foods that support them, the pre and the probiotic foods. The takeaway is the research is still ongoing. New things are coming out, new attempts to support it. So if you find it in a medically a peer-reviewed medical journal, not that anyone has to force themselves to do that much research, but no suggestion should be confirmed until it can be looked at in a peer-reviewed medical journal. Okay, so here was a conference that was 9 years ago. I wish I had gone to it, but hey, didn't get there. And here's what it recommends to make your gut happy. Eat a diverse diet. That sounds very straightforward. Diverse means don't eat the same thing over and over. Try to have as many different varieties of fruits and vegetables throughout the day, throughout the week. Try to keep your ultra processed foods at a minimum. What is the big deal with ultra processed? They're usually higher, as the indication showed by their construction, their composition. They're higher in fat, higher in salt, lower in fiber, and they keep company with other not healthy stuff, like sodium nitrite and things like that. Okay, they suggest eat washed fruits and vegetables, and they don't suggest that you scrub them and peel them, but eat the whole thing. I think you can take most of this advice under consideration, but you're not obligated. Consider a probiotic supplement. That this was again in 1915 with the 2015, pardon me, with the research still coming up with fascinating new things every week. Adequate levels of diverse types of fiber, including the prebiotic, and we talked about what those are, fruits and vegetables, beans, and they say in one sitting. This is the recommendation of the conference. Breastfeed your baby. If you can't, then the next best thing you could do is to just protect your baby with the good foods that are out there when they start to eat solids. 2015 Barcelona, avoid elective cesarean births. So the US, I think, still holds the top of the list for elective cesareans. And I'm not in the field of obstetrics and gynecology, so the idea, once again, is not that it's not good for the baby, but it's does change the access of the baby to getting their first exposure to microorganisms. Okay. Avoid unnecessary antibiotics. Who am I to call necessary and unnecessary? But it's a focus of us as medical consumers that antibiotics, as we have heard many, many times, are overprescribed for things that they're not going to fix. And so the antibiotic industry is now trying to find better things because many bugs are getting adapted, but also it could disturb your microorganisms. Okay, your microorganism colonies. And wash your hands with soap and water instead of sanitizing. Well, this is obviously pre-COVID. And live on a farm. Okay, can't do that. Or have a dog, possibly, or two. Come on, give me a break. This is New York. Okay. And they seems to be beneficial for children if they start with these exposure to things in the environment as babies. So it's never can be disproven. Eat well and be well. And I have to confess, I have always been a follower of the 5-second rule, but I learned from my microbiology colleagues that's not always a good idea. So I'm finished here, and I'm more than happy to accept take on any questions that anyone has. Barbara?
Hello, I'm here, and I know we have people online, but I'm also opening this up to anybody here in the room, so I've unmuted. So we have Alma has a raised hand online.
Barbara also said, please try to end a little early because she needs to make some announcements. And maybe I should do your announcements first, Barbara?
No, not announcements. We have another class coming right behind you at 2.
Yeah. Okay. Hi.
Hi, I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. It was a lot, a lot to absorb. But I wanted to ask you. You showed you were talking about. Am I saying it right? Was that inulin? Something with an I?
Mm-hmm.
And is that something that you recommend that to take? Is that sold like in the flowers? Where is that sold?
It is you can find it in like Whole Foods.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I have that slide here somewhere. But I
Yeah.
think as a human being, we should just go ahead and find
Here it is. Yeah.
we should eat our onions. If you think of making a
Yeah.
stew and you're going to put in onions and carrots and some maybe leeks of onions and celery, those are our magical formulas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Okay.
Wow, you're good. Nobody has any questions. You're very thorough.
You think that's what it is. It's interesting, but very complicated. That's
Yes.
I talked to her
There's a
about.
lot of terminology. You have to, this medical terminology.
Oh, okay.
No, yeah, and then, but she just told me that we can get it prints. And that
Yes, I have a PowerPoint and I can share if anybody's interested. I can print it off for somebody or email it to you if you want to let me know.
And you said something about YouTube.
This is being recorded. So we're gonna have it on the RSS YouTube channel. We do have a playlist for nutrition programs, and so it's gonna be in there.
Okay.
So I'll have it up by next, Monday.
No, it's very interesting, but you need more time to.
It's a lot to absorb. No pun intended.
Because I know that 3 or 4 people left because they found that a little difficult to understand.
Right.
But now we know that we have the copies and YouTube to go back to it.
So
we got something out of it.
Anybody
anyway.
staying? You speak Spanish? You want to stay for the next one?
No,
I have a question.
Yes.
If somebody has GERD and reflux, why they cannot eat onion and garlic and those kind of things? And tomato. I love tomato, but
Hi, is that Agata?
Yes,
No.
I am. Hi, Maudene.
Okay. if I thought everyone wanted to hear the GERD dietary targets, I would more than happily try to squeeze them out in 5 minutes, but I think I don't have time. But Aggie, I don't mind giving you, getting back to you one-on-one.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Sure.
So onions are not good for heartburn,
No.
no?
Reflex, yeah. There's some
For
people, they
reflex.
can eat onion, tomatoes. Tomatoes you can eat, but no raw. You know, like
Hey, Barbara?
Oh, she
tortilla.
walked out of the room.
Oh, okay, because I was gonna say I would try to kind of do the holy trinity, the three most important things. With gastroesophageal reflux, a lot of times you're experiencing irritation of your esophagus all the way down by where it connects to the stomach. It's inflamed. And so tomatoes and oranges will simply make you feel like you just swallowed fire.
Okay.
But it isn't causing the damage, it's just irritating the tissue that's inflamed.
Mhm.
What's going on is that the tone of the sphincter, which joins the esophagus to the stomach, for some reason that muscle just got loose, or something pushes it to loosen it, and then the contents of the stomach can squirt. That sounds tasty. Up into the esophagus. So the
Wow.
stomach has a very elaborate lining to protect itself from its own acid, but the esophagus doesn't. So what do you do to keep your esophageal sphincter from loosening and letting stuff come up? Does that make sense? That's the question. And so there's alcohol and coffee may bother that.
Coffee?
And peppermint may also, it's like saying if it's a muscle and you don't want a muscle to get loose and flabby, what's gonna help keep that muscle nice and tight, that sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach?
Yeah.
That's actually, it's kind of a mystery as to why, if you don't have any other medical conditions that are causing it. Certain medications can do it, being pregnant can do it.
Yeah.
Some injuries,
When I got pregnant,
yeah.
destroyed oh my gosh, after that, I
After
began,
that, okay, yeah, because the progesterone and estrogen fluctuation can make an effect on how nice and tight that sphincter stays. And I get it too. So what I think medications that are meant to reduce how much acid is produced in your stomach, like omeprazole,
I take it.
yeah, that's a standard of care for gastroesophageal reflux. But the mystery lies in how to keep that sphincter nice and closed tight. It's supposed to open automatically when you swallow, but it's supposed to close up again. And that's the wrinkle.
I take omeprazole for the last 20 years.
And I'm hoping it's working.
Oh, it works very well.
But
Good.
does it mess up your bones, they say?
I think every person should be assessed by their medical provider who's prescribing to know what the rest of your medical profile is looking like.
Nice.
Because you can also get nasty things happening when that poor little esophagus keeps getting inflamed. So you want to cut that out as much as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
sometimes coffee and alcohol are the things we love, and they don't love us.
yeah, it's very bad when you eat
Yeah.
cake. When I eat cake, which I don't do it often, but if I eat it, oh, that send me to the hospital.
Really, that bad?
It is, yeah, very bad.
You got it, you're getting it severe, my goodness.
If I eat the wrong things, yeah.
Wow. Maybe
I
you need a
Barbara,
whole topic on that.
Barbara might need the link, the Zoom link, the Zoom account.
Mm.
I need-
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will go to YouTube to look at it again.
We
Thanks
can
for including us on Zoom.
do it again, and I could sort of break it.
To see, one
Understand
time you
it,
can
yeah.
everything absorbing.
Yeah.
It's a lot of information. But when you
Yeah.
listen on YouTube, you could, on your own time, then you could
Yeah.
kind of break down things.
Yeah, she's going to give us.
But it's make different, raw and cook vegetable,
Oh, yeah.
like, tomatoes and,
Well, the citric acid is there whether it's cooked or raw, but I think cooked tomatoes we eat with other foods and raw tomatoes we might eat alone. And therefore it has, when it's by itself, like in a salad, then it might affect irritate us more than if it's mixed up, let's say, with spaghetti.
okay.
Without onions.
Okay, thank you very much. It was really interesting.
I know, I got it, right?
Yeah, Maudene, thank you.
Okay.